Well, it's a couple minutes after the hour, and we're going to have more panelists joining us. I know we have public members attending. Gives them an opportunity to jump into the meeting. My name is Kathleen Sabo, and I'm the facilitator of the Ethics Reform Working Group. And today we're going to be discussing lobbyist disclosure and other issues surrounding lobbying and lobbyists. Let me go ahead and start by just giving a couple of ground rules. So the goal is to allow for as much transparency and participation as possible, even when people can't attend a meeting. We'll put a link to the website URL in the chat, but it is nmethicsreform.org. That's nmethicsreform.org. And we have some materials for today. We'll hope to get those up on the website as well for people to look at. Participants, when you wish to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and unmute. Members of the public, we're going to set aside some time at 12:45. We'll take your questions and comments in the Q&A. So again, we'll make sure we have that time set aside at 12:45, but don't hesitate to get anything in early. We're going to be recording this meeting, and the video will also be accessible at nmethicsreform.org. We also have at that website both an ethics reform input form and a meeting feedback process form available at that website as well. So we did put together a number of material. Let me go ahead and address a couple of other things. And Melanie, I think you've already taken the survey, but we have a survey for members as well. Anybody who's going to listen to this recording, a member later on, I've sent out the link a number of times. Go ahead and fill in that survey if you can. We are soliciting new members. The last time we did have Joseph Maestas, the new state auditor, but I don't see anyone new here today. So we'll go ahead and move beyond that. Nicole, you can go ahead and start getting those materials into the chat. That would be great. So members of the public, if you're on here, you probably realize this as well as panelists, that the move for lobbyist disclosure and reform of ethics issues surrounding lobbying and lobbyists is nothing new. What we have in this last legislative session, we had, I say at least 3 pieces of legislation because something might have gotten by me, but we had certainly had 3 or more pieces of legislation introduced that didn't go very far. And one of the things that it'd be good to talk about is why these pieces of legislation don't move. We've had a number of groups go ahead and introduce reports back in 2013, which doesn't sound like it's a long time ago, but it's 10 years now. Common Cause did an amazingly thorough report on lobbying in the land of enchantment. They looked at oil and gas, trial lawyers, banking, agricultural industry. That was followed up in 2019 by a report by New Mexico Ethics Watch, which looked at the film industry, the firearms, things surrounding firearms industry, and then both cannabis and tobacco. And a Common Cause. You'll see this in the chat as well. And Nicola, are you getting things up into the chat? I'm not seeing anything. I don't know why I'm not seeing anything.
I am working on getting my paste function to work.
Okay. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll have those things in. Common Cause has a information page that'll be in the chat as well. The state resources that'll be posted, they are by the Secretary of State, basically helping lobbyists figure out whether they're lobbyists or not, and then moving on from there. We also have a number of articles and stories, and if they don't appear in the chat today, hopefully they will appear on the website. And then one other thing that we did was send out some materials that have been prepared by the National Conference of State Legislatures. basically surveys, state surveys of registration requirements, public funds, lots of different things. So, and I'm starting to see things in the chat, and so this will be helpful for our discussion. So let's go ahead. We've got a couple of panelists here. We've got a couple of esteemed panelists here. Thank you for being here. As I said, more people said they'd be coming. But let's go ahead and begin our discussion. And again, one of the things I ask you to consider is, what are the arguments you've heard against reform? And if you believe reform is necessary, as many do, what's a good way to counter any of those arguments that you've heard against reform? So Melanie and Dee Dee, you are our two panelists here today. This recording will be available, so we're going to hop in even though we don't have more panelists right now. Let's begin the discussion with one of you. Either of you would like to begin this. And again, I ask you to keep in mind, what have you heard against reform involving lobbyists and how to counter that? So which one of you would like to hop in first? Dee Dee, you're throwing up your hands in
I was just signaling to Melanie that she should go.
Oh, but you know, Kathleen, there's probably a mix of things. It's priorities, it's legislative awareness, it's public awareness, and how do we make all of those things work together so that the public does actually have some transparency and accountability? And maybe it starts with educating the public so that the public knows just how much money is involved, just what the jobs of lobbyists are, what lobbyists do, what their function is. More awareness of that. Maybe educating some of the legislators themselves, some of the chamber leaders, some of the committee chairs, talking to them about the importance of some of these reforms. And then, going after specific items, and maybe you don't want to do it in a large format, but maybe go after if a lobbyist spends X amount of dollars, ease it in as opposed to a blanket law for all lobbyists. As the director of the New Mexico Foundation for Open Government, I am a registered lobbyist. I have to fill out the forms every year. And as we make no expenditures, we don't buy lunches, we don't take anyone gifts, etc. But we do spend time advocating on behalf of the public, and we register, and we are pretty transparent about what we do. Maybe for some lobbyists, it's a little harder because they have more clients and they have more income, etc. But I think it's education. I think it's education and awareness, and we have to start with the public and then move out.
You know, Melanie, I'm curious because have you registered as a lobbyist?
Yes.
And so this isn't a discussion of, all lobbying is bad. I just, want to be clear about that. But one thing that certainly comes to mind is there's got to be lobbying by lobbyists against lobbyist disclosure. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of any specific instance, but I know, when you sit in a lot of these committee rooms, you sit with advocates of all colors, likes, etc. And they talk. And one of the things that I did hear some scuttlebutt about this time is they didn't want people to know everything about their business. And it wasn't so much that they didn't want people to know about how they were lobbying, but they didn't want folks to have access to all their business records. In essence, that's what they felt would happen if they had to make declarations. Again, it was scuttlebutt. It wasn't any specific item that I could point to. I found it interesting. Again, as an advocate, we spend a lot of time with elected officials. We've spent time talking to them about open government. We talk to them about accountability. We talk to them about transparency. So I understand the functions of what is done. We don't have the issues of money. And that's where the issues get cloudy for some folks and get a little messy. Because we all know that money talks. And if you have money and you're spending it in Santa Fe on an issue, your issue is probably going to get some attention by the lawmakers.
You know, one of the pieces of legislation this year was to require lobbyists to reveal the amount of compensation they receive. I imagine that's something that's pushed back against. Have you heard anything about that? I mean, that's been secret
Not
for a
in
long
particular,
time.
but again, if you are a lobbyist in New Mexico, you do have to register with the Secretary of State. If you're a nonprofit, you have to fill out certain information on the Attorney General's website. And if you actually took the time and did a cross-reference, you could see what the yearly compensation is for an advocate like me versus what someone else would be if they were doing lobbying on behalf of an agency and they have to fill out all the forms with Secretary of State. So there are ways to find out information, but it's difficult.
Yeah, Dee Dee, let's hop over to you for a little bit. I know you've been a legislator. Have you been a registered lobbyist subsequent to being a legislator?
No, no, I've kind of stayed away from the roundhouse. One of the reasons is because for many years I was the sponsor of the legislation that said there should be a cooling off period between legislative service and immediately going into the lobbying corps. That cooling off period has varied from 1 to 2 years. And of course, I've been out of the legislature now for 10 years, so it probably wouldn't matter. But I think the symbolism is still there. And so, you know, I have a number of things to say about this. Your first question, though, was what are the objections to this?
Right.
And how do we counter them? And you know, I think that not all lobbyists are of one mind on this, but they're mostly opposed. I mean, they're almost universally opposed, but in one degree or another. And I think what they all agree on is that that revealing this additional information would be a pain in the ass. And so they feel like if they that they already have to reveal a lot. They already have to register, and they already have to indicate what their expenditures are and their contributions, and they do that regularly with various degrees of diligence, you know, but they feel like if they had to file a report every time they were lobbying for a given bill or against a given bill, it would be too much paperwork. This is the stated objection, and it'll be too much work. Especially, and I think this especially comes from the super lobbyists who have 40 clients and maybe, you know, 150 bills they're tracking. So, you know, a small nonprofit or another small business is just tracking one bill. It would be not much of a problem.
So you've highlighted the objection of lobbyists. What's the objection of legislators to passing the legislation?
I really can't speak to that.
Yeah.
The only thing that I can say about legislators and my experience in carrying these bills and being puzzled because they seem such common sense. I mean, I can understand they don't want to reveal what their contract is worth and what their salary is, and object to that. And of course, you know, ordinary businesses don't have to do that, but this is no ordinary business that they're engaged in. And in effect, it's the public's business. So, you know, I think the only thing I can say, and maybe this sounds crass, and I don't want to tar all legislators with this brush, but it is that legislators feel so put upon, so hardworking, so exhausted by what they're doing on a volunteer basis, without much appreciation, they feel, except during the legislative session, that they want to reserve the option of making some real money off of their service in the legislature after they retire or after they are defeated. And so you see a really what I consider to be a large number of ex-legislators up there acting as lobbyists. It's what they know best, and they are paid, anywhere from like, a retainer of like $3,000 a month during the legislative session to maybe $30,000 or $40,000 a month during the legislative session. You can't find that information out, but when I was writing Inside the New Mexico Senate, I interviewed a number of lobbyists and said, well, what's the going rate? How much do people get paid? And a couple of them were very candid with me and said, it depends on the client, of course, and depends upon whether you're on retainer for the entire year for the University of New Mexico Hospital, or whether you are brought on to, defeat a tax increase for a month. And that could be only $10,000 or whatever. So it varies widely, but I think that the legislators, and of course, remember, the legislators, who are the people that they spend the most time with? And that is the lobbyists. They're their friends, and maybe they're besties, and they don't want to, offend them, I think, in this way. After all, they do depend upon them in many ways. So, there's no real talk about it amongst legislators, but when it comes time to vote, they vote with the lobbyists.
And I think that there are several obstacles to good government. There is a legislative power concentration. Committee chairs can determine which bills get heard, what the order of the bills that get heard. Senate Rules is a gatekeeper, LFC, gatekeepers. Just the sheer amount of legislation that is introduced puts legislators themselves at a disadvantage. They are overpowered and outmatched by lobbyists just because of the sheer amount of things they have to deal with. Sometimes the strategy that's employed by good government groups and others just doesn't work. And so, there are a lot of obstacles that you have to consider. And I don't think it's just one item. I truly think it's a mix of all these things. And, we have a citizen legislature, and having a citizen legislature in this day and age may be hindering what actually gets done for the state.
Well, and that's one thing I wanted to point out. Thanks, Melanie. Dee Dee, it didn't take long to bring in the idea of modernizing the legislature into this discussion. When you spoke about, these are people who don't feel recompensed properly for their work, there was a move to change that. I do want to bring in, we have an anonymous attendee who's put something into the Q&A, and let me go ahead and read it. It's pretty comprehensive, and I want to honor the work they put into this. So our anonymous attendee says the issues related to lobbying are as follows. 1, to curtail lobbyist spending during the session, legislators need to be compensated and need to have a spending account. 2, the hidden money in lobbying is with the political nonprofits, not with the corporations. These groups do not spend much money during the session, but spend heavily during elections. 3, spending on meals gives a lobbyist access, but does not buy them a vote. 4, there is an expectation on lobbyists that they spend heavily on committee dinners, on caucus functions, and other semi-official events. For example, the House Democratic Caucus spent $13,643 on a private dinner for themselves, which lobbyists were compelled to pay for. These are the issues that are not being discussed publicly.
I think that's very good. That's very good. I'd like to talk about each one of those if we could.
Sure, sure, yeah, choose, go, it's just us here today and the people who are kind enough to submit the questions. So let's really dig into this discussion. Which one would you like to talk about first, Edie?
I'd like to talk about number 4.
Okay,
Number 4 is the expectation that lobbyists spend heavily on committee dinners and supply the food for example, the last night of the legislative session, where Mark Duran always buys Chinese for the Senate and the House, and others chip in, and the lobbyists themselves serve the dinner as well in the Senate lounge. At least that was my experience. I bet you they still do that. We could easily find that out. But I think that the lobbyists themselves do feel put upon. I know I've spoken to many of them that are pissed off at legislators who expect to have their dinner paid for, who expect to have the committee's lunch bought. And there are many of them, I think, that would be happy to be relieved of that obligation. It must feel very servile to do that as well. And that I think might be one thing that the lobbyists and lobbyists would like.
well, Dee Dee, you might remember Ethics Watch drafted a simple amendment. We talked with Legislative Counsel Service, a simple amendment to House Bill 1 that would have included some money for meals for legislators and staff when, it became exigent to have them in-house. You can't get out during certain times. And that's gone nowhere.
I can't understand that. I just don't understand why that didn't go anywhere. It
I
seems
know,
like
Yeah, I don't know. But Legislative Counsel Service said, we're willing to try it out during the interim period and everything. So maybe there just needs to be a stronger effort. But it just, it didn't go anywhere with anyone. We'll say it that way. Melanie, anything you want to add about number 4? Or do you want to talk about it?
Those are quite big numbers. I'm trying to do the mental math on how much that means for individuals, members of the House, etc. But again, it's compensation, and as Dee Dee says, it's difficult. It's difficult for lobbyists to have to not only do their job, but then they're obligated to do things that maybe they didn't think were part of their job. We know that there's hidden money in government. We know that is something that continues. But if we don't try something, if we don't keep the conversation going, if we don't continue to talk about it, if we don't try to educate the public, then we get what we deserve. And so that is our job, is to keep the conversation going.
Is there an attraction by people to say, like, this is just the way it's done in New Mexico? I mean, is that part of it?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, every once in a while you hear Senator, but last person that I know that said this was Senator Linda Lopez, who said, we're a big family here. We're a family. We take care of one another. That's part of that mentality, I think. And so when anyone suggests another way of doing it, it's a threat to the family. You know what I mean? It's a threat to the way we've always done things. And that is some of the pushback that comes to modernizing the legislature too. Mm-hmm. And that is, that's a threat to a citizens legislature. And, you can hear Senator Ingle saying, legislators, it'll never be the same. It'll never be the same. Legislators will no longer be accessible to their constituents. There'll be a barrier in terms of staff. It'll all be different, and we'll lose our heritage in this as a small state, as a relationship-based state. So, the family's got to get behind this somehow.
Well, and you mentioned the word family, and I know you worked with us on the 2020 report out of New Mexico Ethics Watch, and I believe you also worked on that 2013 report as well. And certainly
Yeah.
one thing that's been pointed out is lobbying is a family business. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely. Yeah, and I did the 2013 report with a number of interns for Common Cause. Yeah, and that's right. And then the lobbyists are families also unto themselves that have been there literally for generations.
Mm.
But I think what we've got, our job, and I agree with Melanie, our job is to also create an alternative so that we keep the family feeling, we keep
Yeah.
the family feeling. And we, and at the same time, we remove the ethical challenge and the taint of corruption, which I think is got to be sort of our mantra. Although it's hard to say that within the legislature, because you don't want to call the legislators corrupt. Oh my God, that would be the end of your bills.
We've had an opportunity, with a lot of public figures to talk about, avoiding the appearance of impropriety. I think of Supreme Court justices and others, and not doing anything to diminish the public trust. I mean, the fact that this is something that people haven't spoken necessarily with the legislators about, otherwise there might be action taken. Is it just an indication that there's little public trust on this issue? I mean, that's what I start wondering about.
I honestly don't know that it's public trust as much as, let's face it, the public is busy. If you're a parent, you've got your house, your household, your job, your kids, etc. And watching what goes on in Santa Fe isn't a top priority. I'm just doing some mental math here. And there were over 1,000 bills introduced in this last session. You divide it by 60 days. That's 18 bills that each legislator had to consider before they could get passed. That's a lot of work. And to read the bill, to understand it, to do any kind of research, I'm sorry, I spent 40 hours during this session on one bill. I can't imagine having to do 18.25 bills a day and understand them. And so I know that there is a need for advocates. I know that there's a need for people who can explain the legislation, offer research, explain what's going on. But I also know that there's a danger when legislators are overpowered and overmatched by lobbyists.
Yeah.
Well, Dee Dee, any comment on what Melanie just said, or do we want to move on to another one of these?
Yeah, I'd like to move on to one of the other points, but I lost it in it's no longer posted in the
Dismissed.
Q&A.
Yeah, I didn't dismiss it. I don't know why that happened. I can see it.
Yeah,
Oh, there it is. I got it. Yeah, I clicked dismiss. Okay.
Yeah, click dismiss. But before
Okay.
you go, let me just, this is a good indication, members of the public who are out and registered and listened, your questions will get answered. They'll get discussed. So if anybody else has anything they want to submit today for discussion, please go right ahead. You can see today we're able to dig in depth and have a good discussion. So get those questions in anytime. Dee Dee, what number would you like to move to, please?
Well, I guess number one, I think we've kind of talked about here is that if we modernize the legislature, it might curtail the influence of lobbyists. But in terms of the spending of lobbyists during the session, there are requirements that lobbyists disclose what they are spending. And there is a GIFT Act, by the way. The legislature in 2008, I believe it was, passed a GIFT Act, which capped the amount of the value of a gift that could be given to a legislator at, I think, $250. And there may be some of our observers who have that exact citation. But it was a cap on the, I mean, that's a pretty generous gift, $250 for a legislator. But, you know, legislators, if you were to tally up all of the gifts that they get, including the electric toothbrushes, the ski passes, the golf coupons, the everything, you know, they all told, that would be a good article, actually. How much is the value of all the gifts that they get during one session? You know, the lobbyists did not really object when we passed the Gift Act, because after all, it was in their interest. They didn't have to give that money then. And so I think that's the kind of solution that we should, practical solution that we try to ask for. But
well, hang on, Dee Dee, before you move on, you know what, I'm remembering the ski pass issue in particular, when we looked, you know, one thing that we looked at was they were all valued at $250. And we're like,
know,
no, they're
I
worth
know.
a heck of a lot more. So,
yes.
so, you know, there becomes
I
an
don't
issue
know.
of, is
I
it
don't know
accurate
how-
reporting? Yeah.
You know, that's the other thing. And that I really, really do want to emphasize today. And that is, these regulations that we already have on the books are only as good as their enforcement. And their enforcement is only as good on their books, is only as good as people like Melanie and like Steve Terrell, when he was at the New Mexican, enumerating what these expenditures were and who got them and when and what they're worth. I mean, the ski passes, I guess they got away with that because, you know, not everybody used them. And also, sometimes you have a bad snow year, so they're not as worth as much as they would be in a good, I don't know. But anyway, nobody's out there at the Secretary of State's office counting the beans to find out whether the reporting is reporting the true value, or whether everything is reported. And the other thing that, Kathleen, and that we at Common Cause are painfully aware of, is that it is not easy using the Secretary of State's website to decipher what the expenditures are from lobbyists, what the contributions are to candidates' campaigns from lobbyists or from their employers. It seems to me, as advocates, and as allies of the Secretary of State, we need to really make sure that that information that we do have is available to reporters and easily accessible to members of the public.
I want to welcome Senator Tallman. Senator Tallman, are you with us? Maybe he's trying to connect too. Well, we'll make sure we get him into this discussion, because we want to hear from him why legislators are objecting to these reforms. But I maybe it's just a frame of mind I'm in, but I'm like, well, if everybody says this is how business is done and nothing is getting changed about it, then why does it matter? Melanie, I'm throwing a softball.
I'm truly, I'm still stuck on when Dee Dee said counting the beans, because literally this year, some farm group delivered beans to legislators, and they put bags of beans on their desk. Beans, peanuts, other produce from New Mexico. So I'm stuck on that. So
cheese.
Yeah,
We got cheese from Tucumcari also.
Yeah. And so, that's always, but again, I think it comes back to what we talked about earlier. It talks about You know, in any program that moves forward, it doesn't happen overnight because there's a big explosion. It happens because there's a drip, 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 drip. And Dee Dee and I both come out of a public relations background, and that's how you work a public relations campaign, is you move the needle by slowly introducing information to people and getting them to change their opinions. And I think that's what we have to do as advocates. We have to, you know, ramp up our education efforts, ramp up the things that we do so that people understand the issues and, you know, work on public awareness. It's really important that the public is aware of what they need to do. And again, I think sometimes the public is so busy. I know the folks in my family that, you know, have kids and dogs and jobs and such. When I tell them they'll say something like, what's going on at the legislature? And you start to tell them and they glaze over because, you know, you've got 2 or 3 issues you're dealing with. And they really just wanted a teeny tiny little synopsis because that's all the time and energy they have. So again, it's a constant public awareness, public education, and we have to keep up with it. Sometimes it's a little frustrating and sometimes we don't get the response we want or the results we want. But if we don't do anything, that's what we get. And if you believe it, you can eventually win.
You know, one of the things that we used to get coming to us at Ethics Watch were, you know, complaints by either citizens or, you know, small advocate groups about the unequal access. And sometimes it would be, oh, a bill was heard at 2 a.m. And, you know, as a citizen, I wasn't there. I got kids at home, or, you know, we didn't pay anyone to be there at 2 a.m., but all these paid lobbyists were there and they got to weigh in and help fashion legislation, and we did not. I mean, that as a citizen, that would be something. I mean, maybe there are other things that don't grab me, but that would be something that would trouble me. You know, that level of unequal access. Is that something you hear from people, you know, members of your groups, FOG or Common Cause?
I don't know that it's something we hear, but it is something that we have pushed for, is that the agendas for both houses, the committees in both houses, be published in ample time before the Senate hearings, the House hearings. I can tell you several times this year when I was going up to Santa Fe, the agenda would not be published until after 5 o'clock day 1, and we were supposed to be in Santa Fe at 8:30 the next morning on day 2. So that means you drop everything that you may have planned, you go up to Santa Fe, you sit, wait, maybe your bill gets heard, maybe it doesn't. And that's a whole different animal. But if there was some kind of rule, law, etc., that legislative agendas had to be, just like they are for public meetings, provided 72 hours before the meeting, I think that might go a long way into increasing transparency and accountability.
We're still trying to get Senator Tallman in here. Senator Tallman, I understand you can hear us, but go ahead and let's see if we can hear you at this point. Still no. And Nicole, I know you're working behind the scenes to try to help him with that. So Senator Tallman, you know, if you have, you can certainly put something in the chat or the Q&A if there's something specific. I know Nicole's working hard to get you in here, so we'll see what we can do. In the meantime, let's are there any, Dee Dee, you liked the 4 things that came to us. Is there any other one of those you'd like to discuss?
I can't think of anything right now.
You know, one thing that you brought up, you know, you talk about the super lobbyists, the people who have multiple clients, and you know this, we've tried to track, you know, sometimes a lobbyist will give money on behalf of themselves, and it's like, well, what's it for? And does that even matter? Because they've got so many issues. A legislator might just interpret it as being, you know, in support of one thing when it's in support of just their business in general. That the super lobbyist issue, is that something that needs to be looked at in terms of reforming as well, or no?
Well, I don't know how you can stop people
I
from
know.
taking on new clients, but one
Right.
thing that it could be done was to identify the clients that a lobbyist has. And, Jeff Steinborn and I together in 2008 came up with an idea of a name tag for a lobbyist that just simply put their name and then their client, so that both members of the public, legislators themselves, other lobbyists could figure out, who's on first, who's representing what. And, we were kind of laughed out of the legislature for that as being sort of a Mickey Mouse kind of thing. By the way, they do it in other legislators routinely. But that's still a good idea, I think, and it's a form of transparency that might expose some conflicts of interest. And also, the lobbyists objected to it. But I mean, it just seems to me that, that kind of objection is really flies in the face of transparency. What have you got to hide? If you're hiding your client, that's not a good sign. I don't know, Melanie, whether you've ever heard about that or not.
I haven't really heard about it, but again, why, the question is always to ask is, what do you gain by not having the public know who your clients are?
Well,
Is
you
there
might
a
not,
gain for you?
you might not want one client to know who the other client is if you're a lobbyist, right? One might be considered to be a good guy, one might be considered to be a bad guy, and what if there were conflicting interests, and there are, and there are. But that seems to me could be handled with simply disclosure. And it would help legislators to know who is lobbying for who.
So one of the things I just did while we were in here is just take a quick look at the legislation that was proposed. And, there are basically like three things that legislators were trying to get. And one was a moratorium on lobbying. And Dee Dee, we talked about that a little bit, a 2-year. Another was revealing the compensation of lobbyists. And then the other was the activity report that would require lobbyists to, reveal not who their clients were, but what they were actually lobbying on and what their position was. So in terms of assisting the public, is there one of those above the others that would be good to focus on moving forward and having a public effort and having education?
Know that any one of them outweighs the other. Truly, I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but I don't know that one outweighs the other because they all kind of go hand in glove together. Dee Dee may have a better understanding having been on the other side of the efforts.
The three were the cooling off period. The other was the
Compensation.
Salaries. Pardon me?
You're right. Yes, revealing compensation. And the third was an activity report.
Yeah, I think the activity report just makes sense. And it should be supported because it's just, why are you not putting down what you're lobbying for or what you're lobbying against? There's just no, yes, it's a hassle. And you saw where Representative Greg Nybert said, they're exhausted. The lobbyists are exhausted after the session. Well, yes, everyone is exhausted after the session. Yeah, that's why you're paid $30,000 a month, maybe, if you're a lobbyist. And I think it would be, wouldn't be too big of a deal to write down, what bills you were working on. You're going to have to do that for your clients anyway, to tell them, the outcome of your efforts. So that there's another thing too, I think that is not included in those three, which really should be also, and I don't know whether this is a rule or a law, and that is more adequate disclosure of when lobbyists are related by blood or marriage to legislators. We have a number of lobbyists who are the spouses or the sisters or the daughters of legislators, and that should be disclosed, and also that there should be a recusal for bills that directly lobbied on by your relative, I think.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and just mention that Judy Williams from the League of Women Voters she made some comments. I just want to read them. The League of Women Voters has been pushing for publishing of agendas in advance. Obviously, we're going back a bit here. The Senate Finance Committee used to have a sign on its page, "See agenda," posted on the door for years. So that goes back to, ordinary citizens maybe not being in the loop, not knowing what's coming up, et cetera, et cetera. One thing I want to bring up is there was some money that was given for a study regarding staffing for legislators, and that would provide analysts, I would imagine, for legislators who could then research legislation and explain legislation to analysts. Would that take away one of the roles of lobbyists? The explanatory role. Hey, here's some telecom legislation. I know you don't quite understand it. Let me sit down and talk to you about it. If they had an analyst, then the lobbyists wouldn't be needed in that scenario, would they?
Well, there are two different items here: Judy's item and then the staffing item. I don't think they're related. Are you trying?
No, they're not related. No,
Oh, okay.
we were
Okay.
past Judy's comments. I just wanted to read them. But if you want to comment on them, go right ahead.
Yeah, I do want to comment on them because I totally agree. It makes it very difficult to for the public. But I was a committee chair for 10 years, and it was not easy to juggle all those bills and to get the agendas posted in a timely fashion, much less as a committee chair read the 18 bills that were going to be appearing on the agenda for the following morning. We have to figure out how to do that, Judy, but we have to maybe work with committee chairs to figure out what's the best practice here, because some of the good committee chairs, like I consider to be good one, was Gail Chasey. During the pandemic, she adhered to those deadlines, I think, and posted the agendas in advance, and made people submit their legislation in advance, even if they were substitute bills. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult, especially toward the end of the session. And Kathleen, you know that too, because you staff the Judiciary Committee. And it's, things come in at the last minute, and you do have to, and committee chairs do have to make a judgment call as to what has a chance of passage, or do you take the bills in the order that they come in? Right. And just do it that way? That's going to count out a lot of the tax packages, a lot of the important stuff that comes through at the very end could not be handled that way. So, we do need to, I'd like to, look at that with you, Judy, on what is the best practice here of how to do it. And it's something that the Committee on Committees in the Senate could look at, and maybe get some public input into that matter.
Yeah, and then Judy, I don't know if you saw, she said, I agree on the difficulty, but would like to see what can be done.
Well, yes, me too.
Yeah,
Yeah, I do think the legislature has reached capacity on bills. You know, there's no way anyone can actually read through 18 bills, you know, that are going to be up that day that you have to deal with, if that's what you're dealing with. Too many bills, not enough time. It makes it difficult for legislators to review, to digest. It makes it also difficult if they make amendments. I mean, that's one of the things that we've pushed for as well. And we know this year, you know, they would do amendments and you wouldn't see the amended bill for 2 or 3 days. And I realized there were a lot of issues going on in the legislature this year. Backing up and thinking about it, a good portion of the legislature that met this session had never met in person, had never met with people in the building. And that added a whole new dynamic to something they weren't used to.
Yeah.
We know in legislative council services, there was a lot of turnover and a lot of new people, and they were trying to learn the job and get up to speed. And, you know, it's a pressure cooker trying to get all of that written and done and correct and not having problems in a bill with either commas in the wrong place or misspellings, just little simple things. So there were some just inherent issues in the legislature this year, just coming out of the pandemic. The other little thing is, you know, now we're doing virtual sessions. We are doing a hybrid session, and we really haven't worked out all the rules yet for how the hybrid sessions operate. And so that even makes a little bit of challenge, not only for the legislators, but for the public as well, because if they are going to meet and allow me to testify, I still have to get registered a day in advance. And if I don't know because the agenda hasn't been out. And so there's still some growing pains. There's still some learning issues. And I do think that the legislature right now is at capacity. Is an issue to limit how many bills can be handled. Is that really democracy? Is the issue to, if a bill's been introduced multiple times and has not succeeded, do we not allow it to be issued again? Again, is that democracy? And so there's issues that have to be addressed before some of these other issues can actually even be talked about.
You know, Judy has a exclamation point after the word staff.
Yeah.
You know, and that's obviously my quick add-on to Judy's comment, which was a non sequitur, was, you know, that there is money to study staffing, and, you know, how much will that help do away with some of the role of lobbyists that people might find objectionable, with, and maybe some don't, but some certainly do, and maybe make for more equal access, you know, for people as well. You know, a citizen's not going to go in and explain a bill to a legislator, but a lobbyist probably will offer. And it's been necessary. I mean, that's the thing. It's been necessary. And that's what we're hearing from you, Dee Dee, as a former legislator, and from Melanie. It's hard. It's hard to handle all of that. And what are the solutions? I hope we all keep putting our heads together on this. We certainly need to. I'm going to look to see, I don't think we have any more questions or comments from the public. Oh, we do. Hang on. Sorry, I apologize. Daniel Ivey Soto. One thing that would be helpful for agendas would be a crossover deadline, which several states observe.
Oh,
It
yeah.
would require that bills leave their originating chamber by a certain date, say 2/3 of the way through.
I think that's a good idea. I think that's a great idea. And also, there could several attempts to address this problem. One would be, of course, to limit the number of bills that could be introduced. We've and Melanie had alluded to that earlier. We've tried that in the past, and the rural legislators say, "Oh, forget it. You know, it's easy for you to say because you represent one school district, one city. I have six. I have six counties, six, you know." So anyway, that seemed to be a non-starter, although they've tried something like that informally. And I, in the House, I think, I don't know whether it worked or not, but I like the idea, Daniel's idea, and also there was an idea earlier of carrying, as part of this modernization thing, of carrying over bills from one session to another, so they didn't have to
Yeah.
start from scratch in the following session. This would be during the same biennium. That was not received well, I guess, in the House, although I don't know why exactly. But that is something that should be talked about too, I think.
Well, Senator Ivy Soto's idea about the crossover deadline, would
Mhm.
that be something that would be implemented by legislation or by the committees on committee and other internal processes?
It sounds to me like that could be a rule, a Senate or a House rule,
Right.
or a joint rule.
Well, and
Mhm.
that's frankly, that's part of the issue here. I was trying to encourage people, legislators to look to change some of their internal rules. And there's not much appetite for that, but certainly some of the things we see about disclosure and recusal are probably ripe for change. Well, we just have a couple of minutes here. I want to thank people who submitted questions and comments today. That's the way to go ahead and do it. If you want to get heard and you're a registrant here in this meeting. I just want to bring up a couple of things for panelists and anybody who's here and who will be watching this video. A couple of panelists did tell me that they would watch the video afterward. Again, we're always looking for suggestions for new panelists. I hope by next meeting we have a representative from the AG's office. It's been an ongoing discussion with them. They just haven't determined who that person will be yet. We're going to meet sometime in the second half of June. I'll send out a doodle poll, and then that'll be made public through registration. But we have the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of June that are possibilities. In terms of topic for discussion, this is why it's important to answer the survey, because we see what people are interested in. We've only had 5 responses. A lobbyist disclosure was the overwhelming favorite. We have financial disclosure. That's also coming in close. We have legislative modernization. We have campaign finance, and campaign disclosure also on the list there, and then the general category of transparency. So let's go ahead and not make that decision here since there are so few of us, but that'll be something we can send out as well. Melanie, do you want me to go ahead and read this out, or do you
I have
want
a typo in it, but yeah, sure.
It says there, I'll see if I can recognize the typo. There are some positive developments on transparency. Something passed.
One transparency bill passed the
Oh,
Senate Rules Committee, a first since 2017. Opening of the House and Senate committees on concurrence. They were all positive moves. So it's not all negative. It's not all doom and gloom. There are highlights and positive outcomes.
Well, excellent, excellent. So panelists will be sending out email, doodle poll, figure out the next topic for discussion and the actual date of the meeting. Members of the public, thanks for joining, and thanks for these good comments and questions today. And be well, everyone.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, everyone.